that works. Okay, so, this talk is, as you may have gathered, called Tower of Babel. And I always feel a little bit strange doing this because I suspect quite a few of you already have a reasonable idea who I am. But for those of you who don't, I tend to get known by MST online. MS Trout is my CPAN ID. That, shockingly enough, is my name. And since people do seem to be surprised by this, Shadowcat is actually a real company. We exist. We have done so for over 10 years. And what we basically do is consultancy, commercial support around CPAN and modern Perl stacks, helping people sort out deployment, refactor the theoretically unrefactorable, and so on and so forth. So I get to have a lot of fun in terms of I have a team of people that I basically stole from being contributors to various CPAN projects of mine, which means I get to do the cat herding, the things that everybody else is scared to touch, and occasionally I get to do something completely insane, like ignore customers for a couple of days to get this finished in time for the conference. And so, meanwhile, our managing director has this unfortunate habit of letting himself get talked into running conferences, incidentally including this one. He did run London Perl Workshop for a decade. He retired from that. The following year, the new leader of London Perl Mongers tricked him into running this. I shout well volunteered at people with respect to code. People keep doing it to him with conferences. What can I say? Anyway, so yeah, that's the short and boring introduction. Now let's get on to something interesting. And so this talk kind of comes from a starting point of, well, it's not so much actually two yaks as two yak stacks, in that these are two completely separate sets of yak shaving I've been doing for about a decade now. And then, well, you'll see. So, yak stack 1 is the but I can't use CPAN stack. So stack 1, yak 1 was people going, but I can't actually install things if I'm not root. Well, yeah, you can. It does work. You know, all you have to do is configure cpan.pm, make PLArg and build PLArg correctly. Then you add a couple of environment variables to your bash RC, and then it works. Which sounds simple enough, but in practice, when I was talking newbies through this on Freenode Hash Perl who had like a shell account on some shared hosting platform or whatever, it tended to take about half an hour and like 3 attempts to get them to the point of it making any sense. So I got slightly annoyed, spent 3 days reading the source code of the toolchain, cpan.pm, module build, xutils make maker, and eventually came up with a small module called local lib that sets 4 environment variables, and then it just works, which is obviously just a little bit simpler. Time to get the average newbie set up with local lib, provided they actually listen to us, about 5 minutes. Excellent. Okay, so what's stack 2? Stack 2 is extending Perl in ways that it really wasn't designed for. So there was a lovely saying, Perl 5 is just syntax, CPAN is the language, which naturally was ordery. And what I wanted to get to was Perl 5 is just a VM. So that means we need some way of doing syntax. But I couldn't convince P5P that it was a good idea to allow syntax extensions. So somehow I had to prove that it was a good idea. How do you do this? Well, you get a bunch of them on CPAN already working, right? But that means you need some way to extend core without being able to patch core. So stack 2 yak 1, I wanted to try and figure out how to get keywords from CPAN. 3 Pumpkins told me it couldn't be done. They weren't quite accurate. The word they meant was shouldn't. But I did it anyway. And the end result of that was a module called Devil Declare. If you have any choice at all, do not use this code. It is a giant bag of crack, by my standards. It hooks into the Perl compiler by wrapping function pointers from during Octree construction and rewriting the source underneath the compiler before it notices. I have to do some slightly interesting things because if at any point I relock something, that's not going to work because the compiler already has char star pointers into it. So you just segfault. Basically, you can inject, I think it's 4K of code into a single line. That's how much extra I alloc in the string on the way in. And then if you do more than that, it goes, nope, I'm going to segfault in a minute, so I'm just going to exit cleanly now. Which means Devil Declare only segfaults, well, for all of the reasons of I'm terrible at C. It actually doesn't much, but that's because other people fix most of the segfaults for me. But seriously, here be dragons. It worked, it proved the concept, and it let people write some really cool stuff. Like the very first method signatures module, more advanced stuff like the MooseX one, MooseX Declare that gives you a class, keyword, method, keyword, so on. And try-catch, which was the first shiny syntax try module on CPAN. So, going back to... This should be saying stack 1 yak 2, never mind. But it's just one script. I don't want to have to set up a local lib and do installs on all of these servers. I'm like, well, okay, I can see your point. I think you're a lazy bastard and you should be able to just rsync it, but okay, fine, fair enough. What's the answer? Create app fatpacker. So app fatpacker bundles pure Perl dependencies into a single script, so now you just have one file to deploy. And notably, the reason it's very easy to bootstrap stuff now is because Miyagawa is a freaking genius, but CPAN minus is built on top of local lib and uses app fatpacker to generate the single file for deployment. So yeah, there's probably a standing on the shoulders of giants joke here, especially since Miyagawa's about yay high. But anyway, so far so good. Stack 2. Devil Declare is a giant bag of crack, as previously mentioned. We should really have a proper featuring core written by an adult. And that's not going to be me. My C code basically, I was really proud when I got to the point where my C code regularly compiled first time and then segfaulted. My basic plan is to learn Rust because it looks like the compiler should be able to point out all of the stupid mistakes that C doesn't. But anyway. So, my solution to this was to give Zephram comment on Devil Declare. So, he read the source code and basically when words to the effect of, I don't believe you did that and now I want to murder you, which was fair enough. And so... He now suddenly understood what I meant about this really needs to be obsoleted. So he implemented the core keyword API, which was fundamentally the entire point of Devil Declare, was to make P5P realize this was a good idea and scare them into obsoleting it. Mission accomplished. Assuming you can use 5.14 plus, just forget Devil Declare exists. One day I will figure out, I will find enough alcohol to forget myself. And that has allowed all sorts of really cool stuff to be built. Leonard's syntax keyword try is definitely worth a look. Mauka's function parameters, definitely worth a look. Kavorka and Moops are interesting, but possibly slightly more clever than you want under normal circumstances, but still have a look, you know. Back to stack 1. So my problem now is I'm writing to pure Perl. Now I miss Moose, because Moose has XS components, requires 5.8, 3 or 4, and takes too long to start for single file scripts. So the solution was write Moo, which is basically Moose without the antlers, yeah? So it's got no meta protocol, but on the other hand, it's small, it's pure Perl, it fat packs on 5.8. And I've been mostly using Moo since. My original expectation was that Moo would end up being, this is what you use if you need to be able to, say, write a CGI script. And then lots of people ended up using it as Moose, but for CPAN, so that people didn't complain about Moose as a dependency, which was kind of surprising, but also very cool. Anyway, Stack 2 Yak 3. Want to be able to pretend things are built in, yeah? So I built a couple of modules to do that. Lib with preamble, you basically give it a directory and a string of Perl code, and any file in that directory, it pretends that your string of Perl code is prepended to that file, and then @myperl wraps it up so you can write a config file for it and type myperl whatever script, which is kind of nice on the author side, but so you could do something like that, and then the first line of your file could be class whatever, and so on, which, you know, very cool. So back to Stack 1, but I'm only going to run it once. And they're like, yeah, I'm only going to run this script once. It's a one-off thing. I need to run on 50 servers, but I'm only running it once. So really, do I have to go through this entire process? So the solution to that was Object Remote, which helpfully I wrote using Moo. I have got these roughly in chronological order, and Object Remote basically flings stuff over the wire on demand, so you can pretend that anything that's pure Perl and installed locally exists on the far side. So you do new : on, give it a host name, it SSHs into the host name, sets itself up, loads that class over the wire, creates an object on the far end, and now you can call methods on it. And thanks to LeoNerd's wonderful future module, you can do that asynchronously and stuff as well. So for one-off system scripts, this is absolutely lovely. But this is the point where we have a Yak collision problem. The problem being, I can't have shiny keywords and fat packing. I went to all of this effort to trick P5P into adding a keyword API to core, and then I can't use keywords. I can't use any of the shiny because I'm shipping stuff to CPAN and building stuff into fat packs, and I want people with ancient versions of Red Hat Enterprise to still be able to run that code. So, you know, my fingers don't even produce / automatically yet. It's ridiculous. So this was a little bit of a problem. So I started experimenting. I'm sorry, I just want to check how far through the slot I am. Yep, that's fine. Cool. So I went and tried to experiment with some things. WebSimple, which I originally wrote for a talk in Pisa called Antiquated Perl. WebSimple itself is not a failed experiment. I still find it really useful for writing tiny scripts that will run as a CGI. But the original syntax it used, I wanted to try and get syntax sugar without needing devil declare or keywords. So I came up with that. And yeah, I am actually embedding the dispatch syntax in the prototype slot. Because it turns out that while you get a warning at compile time if your prototype contains invalid characters, the Perl compiler doesn't actually barf unless you make a call to the subroutine directly. And since all of these that's compiled since all of these are invoked as methods, it never notices. And there's a core function called prototype that lets me get the prototype info out. So WebSimple builds up its router from the prototypes of your dispatch, of your route dispatch routines. And my one patch in Perl core was to add a separate warning category just for the illegal prototype error, so I could turn off just that one and not any of the others, because obviously I want all of the rest of the warnings. So yeah, I thought that was kind of pretty, but it did scare the bejesus out of quite a lot of people, which, okay, fair enough. And more importantly, at the point at which we got experimental signatures in core, now, yeah, it just was, there was no point, because you wanted to be using core signatures instead, not this. So all of the WebSimple docs eventually got changed across to use the string plus subform, and that particular piece of hackery died a probably well-deserved death. So, all right, I spent some more time thinking about this, and tried to write something called filter keyword. This one never made it as far as CPAN. You're welcome. Because I was attempting to redo Devil Declare in Pure Perl, where instead of interrupting the compiler when it had just passed the bear word for a subroutine, what it did was try to use the source filtering mechanism. When it saw something that was a valid keyword, it would return just the keyword text, and then immediately afterwards check the ref count of the glob containing the keyword subroutine, and if that had incremented, then that meant that Perl had just passed that keyword. It almost worked, but not entirely. I ran into problems with one. It was very much along the lines of what I was doing to the source filter system at this point was along the lines of attempting intercourse down a 9-foot metal pipe. It might be theoretically possible, but it isn't clever, it won't be comfortable, and it definitely wasn't designed for that. So I played around with PPI for a bit. One lunatic did actually write a filter PPI that he used for certain source transforms at compile time. But honestly, the big problem there is the PPI API just never really fit my brain. Anybody who's tried to do source transformation with PPI, you can do it, but it's not exactly fun, because that wasn't really what it was meant for. PPI is great as a sort of an analyzer of a Perl document, but not to rewrite things. So after that, I got distracted by other things and kept releasing other random Pure Perl bits and pieces for a while. And started working on a somewhat complicated system that will eventually turn into what I consider to be a better CPAN client and deployment system. And as I was working on this, I was sort of like, you know, if this thing's going to be able to build its own Perl, then realistically, at runtime, normally, I can rely on a sensible Perl. But the bootstrap version is still going to have to fat pack with whatever your original system Perl is. Arse. And realized that basically I could theoretically use whatever features I wanted, but not in the code that needed to be part of the bootstrap stuff. And so I was getting a little annoyed about this. I was thinking maybe ship as simple a core as possible and then use pretty stuff in plugins. And then that plan got interrupted last year when I went to NADC and Damien released PPR. And I looked and went, that's exactly what I've wanted for years, but didn't have time to even try and write. Given Damien said it took him basically all of his spare time for over 6 months, maybe I could have done it in 2 or 3 years. Maybe. Either way, we know don't have to find out because he already did it and he's actually good at this shit. So I took one look at this and basically begged for a lightning talk slot the following day. Spent the afternoon in on the conference floor hacking frantically. Because what you end up with is basically named rules that recognize different chunks of Perl syntax. So I tested a theory. And it turns out that this works. So what we're doing here is we add into the rules of Perl keyword, grab the start of the statement, say method optional white space, identify a white space, have a signature, have a block, and then the embedded code remembers the location so you can come back later and find that method keyword using subster. The reason for doing it that way is I can't just do an m//g because I'm doing a single match that matches the entire document. Which means all of the normal disadvantages of source filters in terms of only being line by line and you not being sure whether you've got the right context, just go away. And I just have to do, you just pass the entire document once, the app found collects the various locations, and then you can pull it back out, pull it apart with actual captures, and then reassemble it into a sub-declaration. And then you shove that back into the code with subster. Okay, that's great. That actually works. Method signatures PP up until 0.4 is that code. And it takes something like that and transforms it to that for you. Nice and simple. Cool. Okay. So this was good enough for a lightning talk. And was also apparently good enough that Damien came up to me afterwards when I was having a smoke and trying not to fall over, and basically went, "I'm surprised you managed to get that going so quickly." I'm like, "Well, that's the only reason I have is because I'd already figured out the parts that I needed to write. I've just been waiting 5 years for you to accidentally build the hard part for me." Well, okay, only sort of, because there are a few problems here. The first one is that code barfs on nested keywords because basically while it's adjusting things, it will end up getting the length adjustments wrong, and you can only use one of them per file. Because obviously if you have another one that's using the same thing, the other one doesn't understand how to parse a method keyword, so it's going to fail to parse the document. Basically, whichever one is, so you know, if you're using 2 keywords in a file, they will both break, because keyword 1 can't parse keyword 2, and keyword 2 can't parse keyword 1. And also, well, you saw the code. So, I went away and thought about it and realized that one of the main things is you need to have a single point of truth where the grammar is registered, and also preferably a less user hostile API. And you know, that's not PPR's fault. Damien did not design it with this in mind. I just, well, yeah. I mean, the original prototype of this stuff was a mixture of my code, Damien's code, and Ingy's code. Insanity is guaranteed, right? And then, but I've been using Babel for JavaScript stuff for a bit because I got kind of addicted to ES6, And ES6 decorators actually make it possible to re-implement half of Moo in JavaScript. I should clean up and release that eventually, but I got distracted by the fact that class decorators in TypeScript can't change the signature of a constructor, and if I'm auto-generating a constructor, I'd like to have it type-checked. So when I get round to reading the other half of the TypeScript compiler and figuring out how to do that, then you'll maybe see a move for JavaScript and TypeScript. But in the meantime, I decided, in the spirit of it's Perl, the name has to be a silly pun, so the code's going to be called Babel. Several people have gone, why didn't you just call it Babel? That's a much better name. 1, everybody's going to think it's the JavaScript one. 2, I would like to have $1 paths for both languages when I'm working on a web app. So the binaries need to be different. 3, it's a pun. We're Perl programmers. Anyway, so, sorry? I remember that code. Can't say anything. I did write Devil Declare, but still. So I built a matching API, and the idea is you do each match of, give it the name of a rule, it then gives you a match object, and then you can fiddle with the text within the match, or take it apart further with an inner version. A grammar API, so basically it starts off with all of the PPR rules in place, and then you can add new ones, wrap them. The augment one is basically there for adding new syntax. It just basically does new case pipe previous layer. PPR : X has a Perl foo rule that wraps a Perl stud foo rule. So you can redefine the Perl foo rule as a wrapper around the stud one, and that allows you to effectively subclass rules within it. In the case of the Babel grammar, internally I'm generating up rule names, so you end up with Perl stud foo, Perl wrapped foo 001, Perl wrapped foo 002, Perl foo at the top. I considered putting that code on a slide, and then I decided that I was probably going to traumatize people enough. Also comes with a source filter for testing and faffing around. So you can use Babel filter. The : means it's Babel : plugin : something. Or you could have external plugins. Currently, if you're going to use this API, you have to give it all of the plugins at once, because of the nature of the way I'm doing the paths at the moment. One of the features that should turn up within a month or so is being able to have multiple things that are invoking Babel, but that basically involves changing the filter from return the entire file to pull one statement off the front, return that, let Perl execute it. If it's a use statement, then that's going to happen at compile time, and that can then hook back in and adjust the grammar for parsing the next statement. And that's actually not going to be that difficult. But on the other hand, by the time I got the current version shipped to CPAN, it was 9:30 last night and I wanted a beer. So yeah, that's probably the first feature I'm going to write when I get back. So, what can we actually do with this? Well, each match within says, take the Perl binary expression rule, but then when you find one, pull it apart. Those 3 become named submatches. And notice I'm matching specifically // and then you grab the before and after code. I do a bit of stripping of spaces because I really like generating code that actually looks pretty. So there's quite a bit of faffing in this code that is 100% not actually necessary, except for the fact that it makes the output prettier. I mean, you know, there's enough reasons to call Perl ugly without me adding more. And then all you have to do is basically you put it back together, you evaluate the left-hand side once, and then use the fact that map doesn't need to evaluate it to do the define check and produce the other result. So basically, foo//bar rewrites itself to that, which produces the same effect, but on 5/8. Foo// bar, similar trick, but with 4. If you have a postfix modifier like an if or an unless on the end, it wraps that in a do block, so it's still syntactically valid. Please note, I haven't written nearly enough tests. Perl 5 being Perl 5, I'm not sure it's possible to write enough tests for what I'm doing here. But when you try it and manage to find something that I forgot to write a test for, please just file an issue on GitHub, and I'll see about fixing it. So what else can we rewrite having done this? Well, s//r is easily doable, which is wonderful because back in the 5.13 series, Jesse Vincent decided to punish people who didn't run away fast enough by making them do bleed Perl releases to help shake out the release process. I was one of the guinea pigs. I didn't screw it up too much. Yeah, it was a 5.13. But I actually released the first ever development Perl to have s//r in it, and then, except occasionally in Shadowcat customer code bases, I've never been able to use it. So this makes me really happy. Because, you know, that's how you unroll it by hand. But having Babel do it for me means I can actually write the pretty thing finally. I've also done postfix deref. In the case where you have a single result, it'll do the map with a 0 on the end trick. And state turns out to not be that hard either. All you do is declare it outside, and then use your variable to make sure it only initializes the first time through the subroutine. That variable is not actually called $madebar. I use a gensim for it, so it won't clash with things. But this made for a prettier slide. The best bet, I've got rewriting for signatures. I can take both the 525-28 syntax and the 22 to 26 syntax, and it will translate it through back to plain Perl. So you can write with signatures, run it for whatever Perl you're developing against, run it through Babel, and the end result will happily run on 5.8 if you've not used any other features. The fun part of that was managing to spot when somebody had done :prototype, because you have to put the prototype in an attribute if you're using signatures. So I had to not just turn the signature into an @_unroll, I had to spot the prototype attribute, because older Perls, of course, don't recognize that attribute, pull that out of the attribute list, and shove it back in as a prototype in the right spot. That was fun. So if you start off with a piece of code that does that, run it with Babel filter cause signatures post deref, it runs. That specific Perl is a 5.14, so has no idea about either of those features. To generate a file without, now eventually there should probably be some sort of nice shiny CLI, but I'm focused on the programmatic interface for the moment and writing plugins, and the fact that as soon as any of you try it, you're going to break all of the plugins and I'm going to have to fix them. So I decided, obviously, the answer to avoiding writing a full CLI yet was to abuse Perl. So, if you're writing a one-liner, you can test $0 to discover it's -e. At which point, I create a subroutine called main babel, which means you can do that. So that then means your minus E is just babel, and you now have the ability to use minus P or whatever. If you're trying to rewrite a tree of files, PI minus E works, etc. You know, basically, I don't know what I want or what everybody else wants out of a rich CLI. So what you currently get is the Perl one-liner CLI you all know and love, with a slight hack to make it easy to use. And it ends up translating it to something like that, which, you know, just works. I've not done say yet. I've not done say yet because, frankly, that was boring and the rest of these were more fun. And, of course, it removes the use experimental entries. What it will actually do is grabs any use experimental, parses the list of features you're enabling, and removes any feature you've got a plugin enabled for. And if it runs out of features and would otherwise produce an empty use experimental, it removes that as well. Because, of course, there's no experimental.pm on older systems. And I ported method signatures PP. The code is now half as long and doesn't give me a headache when I reread it. So Babel itself is on CPAN. 0.090001 went up yesterday, immediately followed by 09002 because I realized I'd forgotten a dependency. Shortly thereafter, followed by 003 because as soon as I tried to show somebody it in the pub, I noticed a bug. I would not at all be surprised if there'll be an 09004 sometime this weekend when I notice the next stupid mistake. Sorry? I sent you a patch on LT. Finally, the signatures stuff was one of the original goals here. And there's been a little bit of drama around signatures and attributes because on 520, attributes went before the signature. And then it was decided, well, it's an experimental feature, we can change it. And it looks prettier after. So in 522, they moved the attributes after. And then during development for 528, it was discovered that there are reasons why you need to have the attributes before the signature, or attributes can't fiddle with the signature in interesting ways. So they've moved them back again. Which is a little bit of an annoyance for the people who've been using both. And I'm aware that there's quite a few Catalyst apps that are using attributes and signatures in their controllers. Now, it's marked experimental, so, you know, there was no warranty here. Free software, worth exactly what you paid for it. No right to complain, really. But it's still kind of unfortunate. And plus, as is traditional on P5P, several people started screaming at the pumpkin that he was destroying Perl and the sky was falling, and. You know, this happens anytime we change anything, right? So, rather than my normal instinct, which is to scream back, will you often stop complaining? It's experimental. I decided to replace their whining with a very small Perl script, which is called appsigfix. So if you do sigfix minus T signatures, it will parse any file that's 520 plus and rewrite it to the 528 syntax. If you tell it old signatures, you get the 522 to 526. And while I was there anyway, plain turns it into an underscore unroll. And then if you do sigfix minus I, that does an in-place rewrite. So basically, if you have a project that's using 526 and you're about to upgrade to 528, you just basically do sigfix minus I minus T signatures, find lib-namestar.pm, and bang, you now have a completely upgraded code tree. Test that on 528, commit it, move on. Plus, since you might not always be in the situation of only having a single Perl to work with, it'll generate a PMC if you ask it to. So you get a .pmc file that Perl 5 will load in preference to the .pm, so you can ship that to systems that need that version, and then use just the plain .pm file during development. And then, honestly, I wrote this feature because I could. If you don't give it a type, it uses a sort of a Fat Packer style hack, and produces a triple pack PMC file that has the signatures, the old signatures, and the plain versions of the code in a hash embedded in the PMC file, and then picks one of the three based on the Perl version. The Perl interpreter never notices. Well, yes, I know you'll notice. It's a PMC file. This explicitly only works in PMC mode. Even I've flinched slightly at the idea of generating that into a .pm file. But, you know, PMC is supposed to be for compiled stuff, right? Right? Yeah. Because lots of the people using signatures are Mojo users, it will strip dash signatures out of your Mojo base use line as well. And after a brief facepalm moment with experimental, it removes the use experimental if there's no arguments left. With Mojo base, it actually leaves it there if there's no arguments left. Because, yeah, it doesn't work very well if I don't do that. So, Babel is highly experimental, but it does work for, this is an early release value of works. It works well enough that I'm hoping you should be able to install it, run it, and then file a bug. But yeah, basically, for the moment, Carton recommended. If you're writing your own plugins, you're absolutely welcome to, but do bear in mind that I'm not necessarily happy with the API yet. Haven't bothered documenting said internal API, and fundamentally, I am going to end up moving stuff about before this fully stabilizes. But on the other hand, if you use Carton to fix it, and you make sure to use the generator thing so what you're shipping doesn't depend on Babel, I don't see that that's really that big a problem. However, SIGFix is basically stable. It probably still contains a few bugs, but it's the one part of Babel where I feel like I don't have enough tests, as opposed to I don't have nearly enough tests. So I would invite anybody with code that's affected by the signature changes or wants to be able to write using signatures and ship non-signatures code to CPAN to try SIGFix first and foremost. So documentation URLs will come from here. I have actually been maintaining it on GitHub, and for once I am succumbing to the inevitability of, much though I prefer decentralized things, humans happily run to the giant single point of failure, so the GitHub repository is actually going to be the primary one. I may not see issues in pull requests, because I haven't figured out the button for GitHub for will you stop spamming me everything on every repository I've been given any permissions to ever. So if you file an issue or a pull request and then don't get a response, poke me with a stick via email or on IRC or on Twitter or something. But yeah, have a play, tell me what you think, file bugs, request other features. At the moment, it's not necessarily that easy to write a plugin, but it should be pretty easy to write a bunch of test cases for a plugin you would like to exist. And that's the boring part from my point of view. So I would absolutely encourage people, if there's a plugin you would like to see, file a pull request with a branch that just has the test cases as if it had already been written, because I'm much more likely to write one where I don't have to be asked writing the tests myself. And there should probably be an IRC channel for this, but I didn't think to create one yet. But you'll be able to find me on, well, Freenode's Perl channel and pretty much every significant size channel on Perl.org, so shouldn't be too difficult. Come on. So, yeah, docs, repository, that should say IRC, that's Twitter. Thank you for listening. And I think that's basically end of slot. Yeah. But if any, so if you want to go get coffee, just go get coffee. If somebody wants to ask a question, I'm quite happy to answer it. Sorry?